Well, this will demonstrate. I'm going to pull on this cleat and you'll see up in here how this thing moves. That thing is just held onto the panel. If I pull hard enough, I could probably pull the whole cleat and the panel right off. So that's not good. These nuts are, I don't think they're captured anywhere. They're just, I think they put the cleat on the actual block and then installed the block with these screws with the cleat on it. Yeah, so as you can see, they were just held in with a kind of a lock washer and these nuts here. So actually I'm going to have to amend that last thing. They all did have these larger washers on there. Just only one of them fell out. The other ones were kind of stuck in between the plywood and the actual teak. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Renovation Sportfish. What you just saw was a couple clips from some of my previous videos where I removed the transom panel from the transom, and more importantly, to go along with this video, when I removed the cleat from the teak block that it was attached to. Now that video was episode 56 if you didn't see it and you want to check that out in a little more detail. Basically what it showed was that they probably put the cleat onto the block before they put the block onto the transom, just because the nuts and washers are kind of just floating in there. They weren't really attached in any way. So for me, I saw that as a potential problem with removing the cleat and putting it back on. Now I didn't test it while it was installed, so I don't know this for a fact, but I could see it as a potential problem. So in my redesign here that you're going to see, I kind of utilized some captive nuts, and you're going to see how I did that. I also restored the teak blocks, which were in really good shape. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you at the end. Okay, so we're going to jump back on a project here that I kind of started, but just kind of put aside. And it's a good time to start it back up. These are, there's two of them here. These are the teak bases for the cleats that go on the transom in the cockpit. And here's one of the cleats, goes right there. There's 6 holes in this thing. That's what attached this to the actual panel and the transom. On the back here, there's a chunk of wood, kind of double-sided tape to the back of both of these. This is an actual piece of the panel that I already installed on the transom, the new panel. And this fits, this is a cutout of that piece. So this is going to, when I attach this back on there, this is going to go right in where there's a rectangle cutout. And it'll be all epoxy when I get to that point. And now, first thing I'm going to do is take some small screws and screw them in the back here to kind of hold these in place. Because I'm going to be drilling and doing different things with these. And I've got some alignment marks on here so I can get it in the right place if it ever gets shifted a little bit. Set how deep this is going to go down into the teak. I don't want it to go way down here like this. I want it to stop right about there. And so to do that, on this drill press anyways, it has this little dial here, and there's a little tightener so you can tighten it up. So you loosen it all the way and you just set it to 0. So it's set at 0 now, and this is loose. So once you got that loose like that, you bring this down to where you want to go with it. I'd say right about there. So now you tighten this up. And that's going to top it right there. Now, all this here is the fiberglass that's on the other side of the piece. That's why I did that. That's it. Okay, so I bolted the cleat on. Let's see on this side. Now these are all the factory holes that I used to put the cleat on, but even when I tried to just drop it in with the bolts all in it, it wouldn't drop in because the bolts were not coming in straight. They were coming in on wacky angles because these holes didn't line up with the bottom of the cleat like you would think. So the bolts weren't really, even from the factory, weren't coming straight perpendicular to this surface into the piece. So what I did was I just put a couple of them in, say these two top ones here, and then I took this rounded file and just filed these holes a little bit to make it so these lined up a little better. But those are the factory holes, so those, you know, didn't think I'd have to check them, but probably should have. But it still works. Everything worked. Everything lines up here nice. I think what the next step is going to be, I have to epoxy these nuts, these washers. I'll take this apart and do that. But first I'm probably going to take this board off and mark with a permanent marker around each of these washers so I know where to put them when I epoxy everything back into place. Because I'm going to epoxy the nuts to the washers and then epoxy the washers and nut assembly to this piece of teak and then put this piece on, epoxy that on. When I epoxy that on, I'm also going to fill these holes with epoxy. And that's what will lock the, hopefully, it's what's going to lock the nuts in place so they don't spin around or do anything. So that's the deal. Okay, so pardon the hum in the background. The furnace just kicked on, but I want to get going on this. I don't want to wait for it to kick back off again. So what I'm doing here, these are the teak bases for the cleats that go on the transom. I don't think I've shown these since I sanded them down, and they came out really super nice. I mean, they look like brand new. Like I mean, they're incredibly nice. I just used my sanding block with some 80 grit paper, and it really didn't take me that long. It was just I had gotten most of the varnish off this top surface with a heat gun and a little scraper, and then the sides I just used this. I probably could have just used this everywhere. And then this also was kind of dinged and dented and kind of messed up because I never took these cleats off, so it was kind of sanded in between them and around them. So this flattened off the whole top surface here really, really good. So I got those done. And I don't know if I went over, these are the original nuts and washers. I'm not going to use the lock washers, but I cleaned up these bronze ones and actually epoxied them together with some 610 West Systems epoxy. And I didn't put a lot on there. I didn't want to goob up all the threads. And they all are holding on there pretty good. One of them broke off. I dropped it, hit on the side. It just popped off. But I glued it back together, and they've been together for a couple days now, maybe a week. So I'm ready to get them on here. So what I'm going to do is I had all 4 bolts on here. I was going to try to put them all individually one at a time, but I was just practicing with it, and it was flopping around everywhere, and I couldn't get the bolts centered. So what I did was I tightened all 4 of them down here, and then I just took 2 of them out. So now the cleat's in the right spot, and all the holes will line up when I'm done. So I'll do 2, and do 2 on the other one, and I'll come back and then do these other 2, and do it that way. It'll take me a little longer, but I think the frustration factor I'm going to save is going to be well worth it. So the idea is to attach these with the same thing, a little bit of 610. I don't want a lot on there, just want them to hold on here in place, because that's not the real thing that's going to hold them in anyways. I've got these pieces here that I made. Once I get this on here, then I'll fill these areas with thickened epoxy, and that should capture the nuts and washers. And that's basically it. You see there's 4 nuts and washers already epoxied together and epoxied on here. They've been drying for a while. This is the piece that is going to go on here, epoxied down onto this. Once that's on, I'm just going to fill these voids here with thickened epoxy, and that should hopefully capture these nuts in place when it dries. Got these little blue things on here. These are actually electrical wire nuts, and I'm just putting them on here. This is one of them. I'm using this size here. It's got these grooves in it that I kind of want to fill because I'm worried about the epoxy getting past the groove and getting down into the threads. That's why I'm putting these in here so they don't muck up the threads. So what I did was I just put some of this packing tape around there. Epoxy won't stick to that. And I did each individual one. So that's that. My first idea was to use this syringe type thing to squirt the epoxy down in here, but this is the only one I have. And I've used it a lot of times, and it's got epoxy all over it. It's kind of torn up, and it is a little bit of a pain to get the epoxy in there anyway. So I'm going to bag that, and I'm just going to squish it down in there with one of these little plastic things. That'll work fine. I got a pre-epoxy everything here, wet it all out. I've already wiped all this down with acetone. I'm supposed to do it on the teak. So I did that. I wiped this one down too just to clean it. So I have to do the back here and all these areas. I'll get it all wetted out, mix up some epoxy, thickened epoxy, put it on here, screw this down, fill the voids, and that'll be it. So I'm going to give an update now on these teak blocks that go in the transom. Now this one here, the starboard one, I just took these out and sanded this all down. So it came out pretty good, but I want to show you guys how they're removed. And I'll get this all cleaned up so it looks like this one. Probably should use a tap, but I don't really have one, so I just really cleaned the threads of this one of these screws off really good. And I just have been tightening it in there a little bit until I feel kind of some resistance, and then backing it off and then tightening it in a little bit. I don't want it to pop the thing or anything, but just back it up. Just keep doing that. Here you can see this sticks out a little bit. I mean, with the cleat on here, it's not going to stick out like that. Probably stick out a little bit. I'll put the cleat on and see, but I think just to make sure, I'm going to probably drill with a Forstner bit on the actual transom before I put this on, right where the screw would be, so it has a little pocket to kind of go into. Because I don't want to cut these screws down because they're all the good height, and if I screw up the threads and I try to thread it in here, it could mess up the nut in there. So I'd rather just cut that pocket in there, epoxy it, and then I'll have a little pocket for the screw to come through if it comes through that far. I want to get these temporarily mounted. I got some number 12, 1.5 inch long screws. These are stainless, but they're not good grade stainless, so these are probably going to be the screws I use to install it. I'll either use 3/16 or silicon bronze, but I don't have them, so I'm just going to use these. They're slotted too, which I usually don't use, but I had them. So that's what I'm going to put them in here with. So here you can see how far the bolts actually stick out, about 3/16 of an inch. So I want to drill like some clearance holes, and so what I'm going to do is just I'm going to drill a pilot hole just to know where it's going to be, and then I'm going to use my Forstner bit and use a pretty good size one and drill in probably 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch deeper than I need it. Well, they don't stick out very far, and then fill it with epoxy, thickened epoxy, and then reinstall this again once that dries. Drill another pilot hole in it, and then drill it with a little bit larger size Forstner bit than the actual bolt diameter. That way the bolt will go, the excess bolt threads will go into that clearance hole, and it won't be pushing out on the transom. I think the original transom panel is not attached here, and it was just pushing the panel out because it had the edge of the screws. I think that's what was happening. I don't know, but anyways. Alright, well, we'll check out the little pilot holes I did after taking it off. You can see one right here. And these are where the original screws were. And there are some holes there. I think it was part of a hole saw, but maybe the screws actually went into those. I don't know, but I filled them. So we're a little bit lower than the original. So that's where we're at. Now we'll just drill those out. So I ended up with a 7/8 diameter bit. Actually, I went with a 1-inch. So I ended up going with a 1-inch Forstner bit for the larger hole. And I'm drilling it about 1/2 inch deep. I've got these things filled in with thickened epoxy, and now I have to remount this on here just to mark the holes again, so I can drill them for the actual screw size, a little bit oversized, and that's what I'm going to do now. And here you can see the holes that I drilled, and there's still epoxy at the bottom of them. I drilled them a little bit larger than I was originally going to because I wasn't too confident in my marking, because some of them aren't exactly in the center of the holes I drilled the first time. So anyways, that should be fine. Now I'm just gonna fit the piece on and then do the other side. There it is installed, and not fully installed, it's just not all the screws are in, but all the screws are in for the cleat, and it fits nice and tight up against transom, and everything's good. So like I said, now it's time to do the other side over here. Now we'll jump forward to where I left off in episode 72. So I'm just gonna put a little wax on these 4 screws because I want to leave them in when I install these cleat blocks. So I'm just using, I got this wax ring, it's for putting in a toilet. So I'm just gonna get a little bit on my finger, and right here, and I'm just gonna rub it on the threads. Just don't want this to stick in there. So these teak blocks are already wiped down with acetone before this wet out process with the unthickened epoxy. That's not something you see every day on the river here, a tugboat. They must be doing some work somewhere up the river. Very rare. I'm sure back in the day there was a lot, but not nowadays. Alright, back to work. Alright, so it's the next morning. These are all dry, and I've already actually taken the actual cleats off of these. My wax trick worked really good on this one, port side one. Starboard side, not quite as good. but I think the only reason was I didn't put enough wax on there. These came right out. Those, every single one, I could only do it about an eighth of a turn, and then back off, and then go a little more and back off until I got them out, and they were all that way. So I didn't put enough wax on those threads, I'm pretty sure. But the trick does work. I still got them out. So anyways, next thing to do now is to plug all these screw holes here. And to do that, I actually took a piece of the old decking that was kind of cracked, and I cut the plugs out of that. So the original block and original piece of the decking for the plugs. Alright, well that's going to do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed that. Next video we'll get to all the varnishing of all that woodwork that I just put in the last couple videos. And the results came out really good. So hopefully you have some interest and some time to check it out. So until then, have a good one, and we'll see you really soon right here on Renovation Sportfish.